I'm ready for whatever you bring.
I'm glad to hear that because we are live. Hi there, my name is Beth Spotswood and I am Alta's digital editor. I am so happy that so many of you have joined us. I can see the room filling up right now, which is really exciting. This is episode 11 of Alta Asks Live, the digital video version of Alta Asks. Alta Asks is an author interview series we do here at altaonline.com. You can check out Matthew Zapruder's Alta Asks on our website, as well as a myriad of other really talented authors and poets. Today, our interviewer is the spectacular Heather Scott Partington. She is more talented than her hair is beautiful, which is saying something. She is an author, teacher, book critic, and a very frequent Alta contributor. She returns today to speak with poet Matthew Zapruder. Today, Matthew is here to discuss his newest collection, Father's Day, among other exciting things. The conversation, as usual, is going to last about 30 minutes. While you're watching, if you're unfamiliar with us, we're Alta Magazine. We're a quarterly. We focus on California and the West. An annual membership is $24. You get 4 gorgeous issues, as well as a number of other exciting perks, like we're going to invite you to cool events like this. We might do them just for members only. So please do check us out. And most importantly, now more than ever, is a wonderful time to support authors, poets, independent booksellers. If you click right below, you can, there's a link to buy Matthew's book, Father's Day, from bookshop.org. So proceeds from that will go to independent booksellers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather and Matthew. If you've got questions, you can hit us up in the chat right here, and I will try and get to them if we have time at the end. Again, Heather, Matthew, take it away.
Thanks, Beth. Matthew, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you, and I concur with everything that was said about the wonderful Heather. Thank you. Oops, I just lost you. Good.
Has everybody been okay during COVID?
Yes, we are all healthy, and for now still have jobs, which is wonderful. How about you?
We're good. We're good. Everybody's okay here and just working from home. So I'm excited that we're going to talk about Father's Day today and just poetry in general. I'm just, excited to pick your brain about what poems should do, what makes a good poem, what makes a bad poem, and to kind of get some ideas just about how you see the world. So let's get into it. I know that you are an editor. You're also a teacher. You're a poet. So you kind of are working at things from many different angles. I was wondering if you could talk about what is the writing process like for you, and how is that different from, say, the editing process?
Sure. Before we get started, I just want to thank you again, and also I want to say a bit of something about Alta. It's such a great new magazine. It's so it's just marvelous. It looks great. It's great to hold. The stuff in it is fantastic, and I've done a couple of different editorial projects that have been wonderful with different editors there, and also, it supports writers. It pays writers, and not to be crass, but that's a really important thing in this time when people are just trying to survive. So I'm very grateful to Alta and for all different kinds of things, and I'm grateful that it exists. So I just wanted to say that. Like a lot of poets, I do those multiple things. I mean, so many poets I know have some kind of editorial role, or they, many of them teach. So it's very common to have these different sort of facets of the way people interact with poetry. And I think that I'm trying to bring all of that closer and closer together as time goes on. I think if you'd asked me that question several years ago, I might have said that, well, I put on a different hat, so to speak, when I'm editing versus when I'm teaching versus when I'm writing. But I've wanted over time to bring those things closer together, mainly because I think that making poems is a very strange thing to do in a lot of ways, and you can really use this kind of feeling of freedom and creativity in all your relations to it. And that's one of the great things that makes it so great and so fun to be a poet as opposed to other things. So that's a little general, so I can be more specific about it if you have other questions. But yeah, I over time I've just felt more and more like just I'm just one. I'm the same person in all those different roles, I guess, which is nice.
Yeah. What should a good poem do?
Well, I mean, not to be immediately epistemologically nitpicky, but I generally object to the terms good and bad when it comes to poetry because I think they're ethical terms, obviously, and I find them a little misapplied. Like, I prefer to talk about a poem that, that I'm able to connect with, or that means something to me, that I might even be the most likely poem to take with me if I'm in a really difficult spot, or give to someone who's having a hard time, or give to someone who's joyful, or whatever. A more functional and a less ethical reaction. That being said, I find that if a sustained attention and a real feeling that from moment to moment in the poem, the poet is, or the voice in the poem has a really imminent, like, present relationship to experience and language. That's what really matters to me. I think that a lot of the time when I find myself frustrated with poems, it's because they seem to get a different agenda all of a sudden, like telling us what to think or convincing us of something. And some of that, of course, is natural in any language use. But the poems, if that goes on too long in a poem, you lose that feeling of freedom, and it can feel kind of dead on the page to me. And the sign of that is often the presence of euphemistic or imprecise language. I think a lot about Hannah Arendt's, writing on totalitarianism and how she linked imprecision, blurriness in language to self-delusion. And I think a lot of ways in poetry, or maybe Orwell and politics in the English language too, a lot of people have written about it. Masha Getzen more recently. And so, I think about that, especially when I'm reading poems and thinking about, my own poems or other people's, my students, or poems that I'm editing, and whether they're, doing what I expect them to do.
You have some poems in Father's Day that directly address critics and the idea of criticism. And we kind of talked about that a little bit in our interview that we did for the magazine. I think it was about a year ago almost. And I was wondering if you could just talk about kind of the role of criticism as it relates to poetry. And I think that relates to what you were just talking about also, with like good or bad, making a value judgment versus what does art have to offer, or what does the experience of reading a poem have to offer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind a good value judgment. It's entertaining when somebody hates something or loves something or has mixed feelings about something. So it's like, kind of just a reader, I enjoy that. I'm not like, opposed to that or think it's off limits. But a lot of my problem with criticism of poetry is that it's not actually a close reading of the poems. Poets take all this time to choose the right words, and put things in certain forms and not others, and do certain things and not do others. And I'm not the first person to say this, but I mean, a lot of criticism skims the surface, or it sort of treats poems just like they're content delivery devices, or the same thing as an essay. And I understand, people have space pressures. That there's not enough room for that kind of talk sometimes, and especially in major publications. But that's one of my problems with criticism of poetry. It's hard. It's hard to do it well, and there's a few people who do, and a few places where you see good criticism, but it's tough, to do it. And I just would like to see more of it, I guess, but I understand why there isn't.
Yeah. Why do you think that people are afraid of poetry? Why people feel like it's such a big, like I teach high school, and I've been teaching high school for a long time, and there's always kind of a fear factor when we say, okay, we're going to look at this poem. What do you think some of the reasons for that might be? Not just for kids, but for anyone.
Well, I mean, we could talk about bad ways that people have been taught or incorrect information they've gotten about poems. And, you know, I wrote a whole book about this more or less. But like in a certain kind of way, I mean, if we're just talking here, and I mean, poems are kind of monstrous, you know. I mean, they ask you to change. They ask you to change. You know, there's that famous last line of Rilke's sonnet, "Archaic Torso of Apollo" in English, and the last line is, you know, something like, "There is no place that does not see you. You must change your life." And you know, it's the intensity of that feeling sometimes, and the intensity of the presence of a voice that you're connecting with can be painful and scary. And it's also, poems are anarchic. They ask you to change. They ask for things to be different. They demand for things to be different. They don't accept the world as it is. And you know, only the best teachers can somehow incorporate all that chaos, impulsive chaos, into like making a functional classroom. You know, that takes work, as I don't need to tell you. So yeah, I you know, poems they don't behave, and sometimes we just want people to behave. So
can you talk about a poem that you've read recently that changed you, that had that kind of energy?
It's a great question. I just this morning read Dean Young's new book of poems from Copper Canyon. It's called Solar Perplexus. And there are some poems in there that are there's some poems in there that are about poets who've died, who I knew personally as well, and who were very important to me. And just the kind of intensity of the feeling of loss, and also just that way of thinking that's gone now. It's still there in their poems that they left us, but they're not there anymore. I mean, did it change me? I mean, it reminded me of something that maybe in some ways, maybe I didn't necessarily want at that moment to feel. You know, we're all so scared right now around us all. I mean, I don't know if we all are, but you know, a lot of us are, or I am at least. And you know, I'm not sure I need more mortality right now, but maybe that is exactly what I need. And so yeah, I had that experience this morning, and it was really, I try to wake up in the morning, and before I get on my computer and running after my kid and all kinds of stuff, I try to just read for a little while. It makes a big difference in my day. And so that's what I did this morning. And yeah, so when you said that, I just had that experience of the intensity of those poems. Yeah.
Some of the poems in Father's Day are political. They're very personal, but also political. And thinking specifically of the poem Paul Ryan that you wrote, that's gotten a lot of attention. What is the response like, or what has it been like to see how those poems affected people out in the world that are directly, overtly political?
It's been surprising because, you know, I mean, first of all, in this book, I mean, I was really just writing I was doing a lot of daily writing, which is something I like to do. And and a lot of time I'll just sort of launch myself into a poem from whatever feeling I'm having. And at the time of writing that book, you know, I read a lot of news like all of us do, and just the odiousness of Paul Ryan was so apparent to me that I was interested in what would happen if I just sort of let the feeling of impotent rage I had, like, direct me into the poem, because like that's not a feeling associated with writing poems, that kind of rage, you know. And so I was like, what would happen if I just let myself get as angry as I possibly could and start out the poem that way, and then see where it took me? Is it just going to remain just pure rage and ranting, in which case, or is it going to take me through to some other place? And I think that poem did go to some other place, which is why I kept it and didn't just, you know, just leave it in my computer. But I had a funny experience. There's another poem in the book called Roseanne Barr, which is actually almost like a throwaway poem. It's like a little bit of kind of like, not throwaway, but it's like, it's more offhand in a certain kind of sense. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but like somebody tagged me in some discussion that was going on in Facebook. You know how people do that periodically, like they'll tag you and you click over and then you realize like there's a whole discussion. It's like when you're in high school, like suddenly if you were dropped into the group of people who were making fun of you for your sweater or whatever. So anyway, it's like there were literally, I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of people on Facebook talking about how this poem about Roseanne Barr was the worst poem they'd ever read, and it wasn't a good poem to use this terminology. And poor Roseanne Barr, and what did she do to deserve being abused by this poet? And it was just amazing. I realized, one of the moments you realize, you're like, oh, I'm cut off from a whole discourse that I'm not, like, I don't generally see, because those aren't my friends or people I work with, or but it's out there. So that was kind of interesting and disturbing.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me like it would be there's also some incredibly vulnerable poems in this collection about being a father, and about being a son, and fatherhood in general. Is it I want to say terrifying, but maybe that's not the right word. Is it terrifying to release your vulnerable words into the world in that way, or is that something that at this point you're used to, and the poem is what it is on the page?
I'm not used to it. It's horrible. It's I said earlier that I was doing a lot of daily writing. I often write in correspondence with people. Like, I have friends who are poets, and we'll decide for a certain period of time, either formally or more informally, that we're just sort of going to write and send each other back poems. And, often those are people I know really well, so they know a lot about my life. And so I write about things in my life that, I don't feel like I'm revealing any new information to them. So it's not scary to me to do that. But then what happened is I wrote some poems, and I realized that they were like central to my poetic activity right now. And I was sort of trapped in a certain kind of way. I was like, well, I could just keep this to myself and protect myself and certain details about my family, that I'm not ashamed of or anything, but it's just my own personal stuff. I found myself suddenly in the position of a memoirist, and without really any preparation to be there, because I hadn't done the kind of thinking that most memoirists do about this sort of stuff, and it just snuck up on me in a way. And I sent a group of poems to Kevin Young at the New Yorker, and I knew when I sent it that the most intimate, vulnerable poem was the one that he was going to choose, if he was going to choose one. And sure enough, that's what happened. And it was wonderful. So of course it's great to have a poem in the New Yorker, but I was also horrified, because I realized that my business was going to be out there for, as they say, all the little old ladies in Peoria. That's the expression they use. So I don't even know what that means, but that's what people say. I don't know why Peoria takes the blame somehow. Anyway, but yeah, it was kind of it's difficult, I don't, but also a privilege, right? I have a choice.
Yeah.
I don't have.
Yeah. Do you think that this time that we're in, COVID-19 and the pandemic, do you think that it's going to affect poetry, or is already affecting poetry that's being written or will be written?
Unsurprisingly, a lot of people are writing a lot of poems sort of out of this situation. Of course, a lot of people are doing all kinds of writing out of it. Poems, in a weird way, are kind of more nimble, because they can respond very quickly to certain situations. I mean, essays can too, obviously, but nothing is quicker to make than a poem, And I was doing a daily writing project with my friend, who's a great poet, Ada Limon, and she and I were in April passing all these poems back and forth, and I wrote a lot about this experience of being in the pandemic. But one way that I think it might change things, and I think this is reflective of a change that's necessary in the culture, and a lot of people are writing about, is that I think we have gone pretty far in certain ways towards individuality, both in all sides of the political situation, and I'm not even passing judgment on that, but there's the other part, which is our collective selves. And we need that sense of collective self in order to respond to climate change. And I've felt for years that we are really, in a difficult spot. And then this pandemic seems to have made it absolutely clear that if we do not behave in some kind of collective way, we're all gonna, you know, we're not all gonna die, but I mean, a lot of people are gonna die who don't need to die.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
this fight over whether we should wear masks or we should social distance or whatever is emblematic of a larger question we have as a species, basically, at this point. And I think poems are starting already to engage with that issue.
Mm-hmm. Do you have something that you would like to read for us?
Oh, sure. What do you have a do you want to hear something from the book, or do you want to hear something new, or how do you? I'll leave it up to you. What do you feel? How do you feel?
How about something new? How about a new,
Sure.
brand new?
Great, brand new. So so this is the poem. So you're familiar with Rupi Kaur? Do you know who Rupi Kaur is? The poet, yeah. Rupi Kaur. Yeah, Instagram poet, has sold like 3 billion copies of her poems.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by her. I'm fascinated by what people like about those poems. I'm interested in the poems. And so I kind of decided, I've been thinking about her a lot and writing about her some. And so I decided I was just going to write a poem for her. So here it is. It is titled, unimaginatively, but helpfully titled, Poem for Rupi Kaur. So here's Poem for Rupi Kaur. Lying in bed at 3 a.m., listening to him cough in his bare pajamas is not fun. There is no joy right now or ever, now that I know my heart lives outside my body, in him and the grass and my wife. Because you wrote defeated eyes, I know you understand how I feel when I say the high fever of night. There are no defenses. Again, I do the math. Will I live long enough to see him thrive in what sort of world we are living, not in, but on? You know what I mean. One of the continents is on fire. You are not wrong to think in poems we can solve something complicated. A lot of things are not information. Here in the middle of complicated night, it has become clear we cannot trust the central metaphor, which is we are children. Though it is true, we are not safe anywhere. I love my son, his little bare pajamas, my wife, the grass, the ends of poems. So I was kind of interested in like the directness of her language and just the absolutely unadorned and almost like collective feeling of her language. Like I wouldn't generally write a line like, oh, I might, but like, you know, is not fun. You know, like that's so like blunt, right? And general kind of, but everybody can recognize it, I think. And so I was interested, I said that earlier about the Paul Ryan poem, like letting anger kind of direct me. In this case, I was like, I wanted to let this feeling that like sometimes you just want to say the most common expressions in poems and see like where that feeling led me. And like, you know, and also to quote her, she has a poem in which she says defeated eyes, which is a kind of cliche in a certain kind of way, but it's actually interesting the more you think about it. Defeated eyes, like what defeats eyes? Now, how can eyes be defeated? What is that war? You know, what is that battle? So anyway, so you know, that kind of thinking, I guess, is you know what I was interested in with that poem.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Where can people find you online if they'd like to keep up with all things Matthew Zapruder?
All things. Twitter, Facebook. I'm not on the gram. But, Twitter, Facebook. I have a website, which is my name also. All these things are under my name. So yeah, I think that's where you can keep up with me online. Alta.
Great.
Alta online.
Yeah. Definitely. And so we're going to have Beth come back if there are, and to see if there are any questions from people who are viewing. Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks for the great questions. Before we move on to people's questions, which I'm sure will also be great. But.
I hope so. Thanks for all the Alta love. This is the first time that we've gotten so much Alta love in a Alta Asks Live, as well as a extended reference to Roseanne Barr. So, two firsts right there. One question that we got is, in a lot of published poetry, there are indentations in the prose, and each line, you know, occasionally there are indentations. Is that, what are we intended to do with that? And is that a question you get a lot?
Well, I mean, generally the question of form, you know, why poets do what they do with form is a question people think about all the time. Poets think about that all the time, you know. I mean, I can only answer it from my own perspective, which is that for me, form is really bodily. It's like, it's somatic, to appropriate a term from C.A. Conrad. There's a way that the poem needs to be at a certain pace, both visually and when it's read. And you can only find that through trial and error, I feel like, or I can only find it through trial and error, maybe some. So, you know, a poem might in the end need to be in couplets or spread out all over the page or crammed all together or whatever. And it's very intuitive, like what works. And I just have the experience that I feel it physically when I know it's right. So to me, it's not like a conceptual thing. It's just like, you know, that doesn't feel right to me. That needs to take longer. That needs to be quicker or something. And I could get in the weeds about the technical stuff, which I won't do, but it's more or less about that. I think about pace. You know, another thing is readability too. You know, it's like you sometimes you can signal in the poem, oh, I'm onto a new idea here, or I'm shifting things here, and you want, you know, you sometimes that's what the breaks, stanza breaks, or indentations, or space in the poem is just says, like, okay, brief pause, like a paragraph break, basically. You know, more or less.
Can you recommend some resources to find new poets that we might not be aware of?
Yes.
I'm going to try and find these really fast as you say them.
New poets. I mean, there are younger or emerging poets are publishing at a quite a rate. So there really are a lot of places. I like a magazine that's online called Adroit magazine, ADROIT, Adroit, and they come to mind because I think they publish a good mixture of established people and more you know, emerging voices, and they have really good criticism, good reviews on there, and and interviews. I mean, I did something recently with somebody who was very diligent and and creative, and so that's one place. I mean, there are a lot of places. I see in the comments that there's a lot of places that have Poem a Day. There's the Academy of American Poets. There's Poetry Daily, a place like that. You know, I subscribe to all those and just see what comes in every day and just cast my eyes over, because I'm always looking for good new stuff, you know, frankly. But yeah, I think that's a lot. I mean, there's so much, right? And we need it to be curated a bit. So places like that are good because there's a funneling that goes on. And then once you like something, you can go off exploring in the internet, as we are all want to do.
It's 1 o'clock. We're out of time. I have linked to, I think, everything you mentioned. Blaze, our managing editor, Blaze Zariga, another big Matthew Zapruder fan, I'm pretty sure, has linked to narrative and a great editor. And
for real, like a really, really good editor. He's edited, I mean, me and I adored being edited by Blaze.
Okay, well, that's a big sell. Hey, submit Blaze at altaonline.com if anyone wants to submit a pitch. Blaze says to check out Narrative Magazine as well. So I've linked to the Instagram poet that I had not heard of, so I'm going to check her out. As well as Paul Ryan. I've linked to My Life, which is the poem that Matthew did that appeared in the New Yorker that destroyed me the other night when I reread it.
I think I saw Sarah Borjas. I think I saw that she's a BOR.
She is. She says she's about to go write a poem now.
So she's a killer poet, who I would call emerging. So that's somebody, a good place to start. Her work is really cool, and very intensely engaged with whatever it casts its third eye upon. So I would recommend Sarah's work, SaraBorjas, Sarah Borjas.
Cool.
So-
I'll link to her right now as well. I think Sarah's the name that's come up in Alta meetings a lot. We're big fans of hers.
Yeah, me too.
All right, guys. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
The next issue. There we go. For those of you who are Alta Asks Live regulars, awesome. If you're new to us, great, because I've got exciting news. Next week, we're booked through June. Next week, we have author Eden Lepucki joining us.
Love it.
Following
Awesome.
her, Rishi Reddy on June 10th, Todd Goldberg on June 17th, and Katie M. Flynn on June 24th. So we've got a really exciting lineup, and I hope that you guys will stick around with us. Again, you can buy Father's Day with the green button right below us. Check it out. And thanks, everyone. Big thank you, Heather. And of course, a humongous, humongous thank you to Matthew.
Thanks
Thank
to you
you.
both. Really.
Bye, guys.
See you soon. Bye.